Today we're talking about what are in my opinion the top 5 worst items that we have in the game right now in Season 6. I figured this would be an interesting thing to look at now that everything in the season is said and done and we have a lot of statistics as well, but at the end of the day this is my personal opinion and I can't stress that enough. While there are statistics, item usage and the effects of items are often highly subjective, so this is just my personal take. Not all of these items are in the top 5 for the same reason, and I will explain the individual reasons. And this is primarily focused on Conquest, but I will mention where it wouldn't apply for other modes. Let's begin with spot number 5, and this was already a hard one. I had a really tough choice between two options here. I will talk about the other one later. But spot number 5 goes to Silver Branch Bow. Now, Silver Branch Bow is technically not a completely terrible item. And I've talked about this in the past, you may remember this. Stat-wise, this item actually has quite a fair bit to offer between its attack speed, physical power and penetration for a relatively low price. As far as I was able to find, Silver Branch Bow was even picked up in the Pro League. I think a total of 3 times this entire year, 2 times of that on Artemis and once on Apollo. Why would I still put it in the 5th place? Because I think this item has an inherently terrible design. This is the only item that makes the list because of that. But the problem with Silver Branch Bow is that the passive is kind of encouraging you to plan your build poorly and rewarding you, but to a lesser extent than any other better item choice could give you. The reason why the item was still sometimes picked up at the beginning of the year is because Hi-Rez basically inflated the other stats of the item. They pushed the other stats so high that the item could be decent enough without the passive for some gods. And then with the passive, it can be rewarding on Apollo when he has his own passive active, or with Artemis when the 2 is active and you are at the point where you have a high amount of attack speed from the 2 itself, as well as some other attack speed items. But I think Silver Branch Bow would be a much more functional item with a stronger or somehow modified passive, and then in return some lowered base stats on the items, so you actually pick up the item for the passive itself and not use the passive as a little gimmick to kind of justify the pickup over a pure power item, for example. Spot number 4 goes to an item that gets a bit of an exception to it for other game modes, mostly for Assault, and that is Mail of Renewal. In Conquest as well as most other modes, there is just very little purpose for Mail of Renewal. The stats of this item alone are okay: 2250 gold, 400 health, 10 HP 5 and 10% cooldown reduction. Now, you're already kind of running into the issue of having a defense type of item without any actual defense on it, just health, which can be problematic with many items countering health at the moment, such as Kinsize of course, but also now Ethereal Staff for example. So that is the minor issue. But the much bigger issue of this item is the passive itself. You gain 15% of your maximum health and mana over the next 5 seconds when you get a kill or assist against an enemy god or objective. So what's bad about that? Well, first off, in Smite, anti-heal is extremely easy to come by, it's very cheap, and the items are highly cost efficient. It's very rewarding to go into anti-heal in many situations. These items are also a good fit at pretty much any point of the game from early to late game, so it's very easy to go against an item like Mail of Renewal with that. And when your item's main selling point over others is self-heal, then that is a problem. On the other hand, we're also in a relatively low kill meta. Sure, you have the level 1 invades, but that doesn't really matter because you won't have this item at level 1. And progressing further into the game, we generally see relatively few kills until the games often get decided in late game in a few fights really. And contrary to what it may seem, Mail of Renewal isn't that good in those late game teamfights either, because what you want on the characters that would primarily build it, being supports or soul laners, are items that assist the team more or provide yourself with counter options and utility. Mail of Renewal doesn't counter anything and doesn't give your team anything, only yourself. The current conditions just don't favor that playstyle, so Mail of Renewal goes in spot number 4. Son of Gaia follows relatively close behind, but Son of Gaia has a little bit more independent utility, I would say, by having some counter mechanics, and it also doesn't rely on getting kills, so I think it's still a little bit better. Spot number 3 goes to, also excluding one particular mode, Bracer of Undoing. The mode in question here is Duel. In Duel, Bracer of Undoing can be fantastic. But that's about it. Why? The relic effect is using this item restores 40% health and mana lost within the last 5 seconds. And first of all, that's exactly the same problem that we talked about with Mail of Renewal. Anti-heal is extremely easy to come by, and if you see someone building Bracer, you're just gonna build anti-heal and that's it for Bracer. The other issue is who is even supposed to build it. On squishies, it usually doesn't make more sense than Aegis because they usually can't opt into defense different from duel, so hunters and mages are out. Supports are currently often going into Frenzy primarily, and as a second relic they will sometimes need Blink, and if not, they definitely want to get some team utility in there, something like a Shell or sometimes even Meditation if the anti-heal isn't too strong, but you definitely want to have a self-healing item only as a support. It's even worse for solo laners, where one slot is pretty much always taken by teleport. Therefore, the other slot is often used up by Blink as well, depending on which guard you're playing, and otherwise you definitely want to get some team utility in there as well, because those are the guards where you usually get team utility in the first place. The only one who would maybe have room for it if it went completely uncounted would be the jungler, but even then they usually have better options for themselves. And that brings us to spot number 2, an item that I genuinely never see anywhere, and that is Spectral Armor. Spectral Armor, stat-wise, isn't even all that horrible. It's relatively cheap with 2100 gold to its name, 70 physical protection is definitely up there as well, 300 mana is alright, and 10 MP5 is alright, could be better, and 20% crowd control reduction is maybe also undervalued. The problem with this item is clearly the passive. Critical strikes only deal 50% bonus damage to you instead of 100%. Now the first problem with that is that hardly anyone is building crit at the moment, it's just not the favored path in most situations. So that already limits the usage quite a lot. But that's not the main issue. The main issue is and will always be the existence of Hide of the Nemean Lion. Because what happens with Spectral Armor is, in order to have any effect from the passive itself, the enemy has to crit you in the first place. If not, then the passive is entirely useless. So it's very situational and very reliant on the enemy's crit chance or your bad luck basically. And gambling on that in the first place is weird. For 100 gold more, you get 100 less mana, 10 more MP5, which I would value more. You do not get the crowd control reduction, but at the same time you reflect 25% of all basic attack damage back to the attacker. Not only is there no gambling involved, it also has a much more drastic impact on the enemy that's attacking you. An ADC that just deals a little bit less damage is just going to keep shooting. That's what you'll see when an ADC fights a gap. They're not going to stop shooting just because the damage is lower. An ADC that takes damage every time they shoot will be scared off a lot more. And of course, having lower HP, there's also a higher chance of them being killed and not dealing any damage anymore at all. And in my eyes, that's much better than reduced damage. Now, of course, you could build both together, but between items like Midgardian Mail or Witchblade or whatever else you want in the physical defense department, there are so many options that I would choose over Spectral Armor that I could never really see myself going Spectral Armor unless I'm against, I don't know, 3 enemies with crit. And the only place where I could see that happening is in Match of the Day. Before we get to spot number 1, I want to make a few honorable mentions. The first ones are the masks. I specifically exclude the masks because I know some of them are not really used at the moment and some of them fell out of favor even though they used to be good at some point. But these items are designed to be super niche and designed to be used for those playstyles that have to be figured out first, and sometimes ever so often the guard comes up and it's like, hey, that actually works for me. So I don't think they should really be considered the same way that any standard item is. An item that almost made the list was Soul Eater. Soul Eater is, in my opinion, a very weak item at the moment that just can't compete with RC in terms of overall stats, and RC still comes with Pen as well, so it's still effective for ability users too. However, there's an exception here that is Pele, and due to her being relatively good with that item, I can't really say that it's inherently bad because there's just one guard that makes very good use of it. And the same thing is true for Golden Blade. Technically, this item doesn't really achieve what it's meant to do for most guards and doesn't really allow many more junglers to jungle or something, but at the moment it still works decent enough on Arachne and Bakasura and is often built on them because they have this single target damage and it really helps their clear in the early stages of the game. Assassin's Blessing in terms of raw stats outside of the jungling aspect of it could be mentioned as well, but I've discussed that plenty in other videos and I don't think it quite makes top 5. And the last honorable mention goes to Poison Star. Now I think Poison Star is very out of the meta, and there are very few reasons to use it at the moment. And that is because there are so many other crit items that are better. I tried to look through the competitive games, and since April I found 3 games where Poison Star was built, and one of them was actually built regularly, and 2 of them it was built as the 3rd crit item in a build, so at the very end. It's just that Poison Star and Wind Demon were kinda consistently balanced against each other, around each other, and at this point, in my opinion, Wind Demon just offers a lot more in most situations, and so you'll see most hunters pick up Wind Demon because it just synergizes more with their DPS as well. At the same time, we have Fail Not now as a new crit item, which is very effective. For very high crit chance, you can still go into Rage, and Deathbringer is the crit item that you always want, so typically you will see at least 2 of these before you even consider Poison Star. Even Malice is used more because Ataraxia specifically established it on Jingwei, and it's been used a few times there since, even though Malice is also not exactly a meta item right now. But overall, Poison Star was just used a little bit more towards the end of the season than Silver Vantage Bone. I think it has a little bit more of an application here and there, so I will say it's not quite making the top 5, but very close to it. What is, however, making the top 5, and not only top 5, but spot number 1 of the top 5, is Stone of File. I'm gonna give you a quick refresher on this one because there's a good chance you don't even remember what this item does. It costs 2,300 gold, it comes with 70 magical power, 40 magical protection, and 10% cooldown reduction. The passive is, anytime you would be dealt more than 20% of your max health by a single magical ability, that damage is instead reduced by 10%. Now first off, that passive in itself is really convoluted. Who wants to calculate in the middle of a game if this item's efficiency is going to be worth it? Okay, this enemy is dealing roughly 21% of my health as damage, so I could reduce that damage output by 10%, which makes it roughly 19 damage or a little bit less than that. Could that be efficient enough? No, I don't even do those numbers. And I am known as one of the people that looks at numbers in Smite and discusses them. So why would anyone else want to do this? Then the item also counters itself because it gives you protection, reducing the damage, and then the damage output is factored to potentially give you more reduction. And if you were to build more health to get more tanky, you're also going to get punished for that because then the ability is less likely to deal 20% of your health as damage. Aside of the passive in itself being stupid in my opinion, if anything, this passive should be working on a fixed value. So say if an enemy deals more than 300 damage to you, then the passive comes into action. With its current design, the item is not rewarding to be picked up by tanks of any sort because of this percentage value. So it's clearly intended for squishy mages, but if mages look to specifically only counter magical damage, which is already rare, then this item itself also has not enough protections at all. You're much better off getting a magical defense item with some health and then a magical power item. The stats themselves say I want to build damage, but I also want to have a little bit of countering for magical damage as well because I'm taking a little bit too much magical damage, but then the passive says the exact opposite and says I'm getting bursted by magical damage, I need to counter that. It just doesn't work together. So those are my top 5 worst items in Smite of Season 6. Let me know what yours are in the comments down below. If you're new to the channel, feel free to hit the sub button and maybe the bell, it really helps me out, and we're gonna get some more top 5 stuff, some best worst stuff going in the next days, as well as some Heimdall stuff. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.